are trying to, if we're trying to identify, a solution for promotions, we got to look at two numbers. For assortment, it was just one number, velocity. This one is two. We want to look at the average, what we call baseline sales, and then compare that to what we would generate, what lift that would generate if we were able to look at promotional levels of volume. But the baseline volume here, if you look at those cells highlighted in orange, that's a $1,700 average per month when we didn't get promoted. So that's what we're selling normally. That's our baseline business. The cells in yellow highlight when we were given a display, we were able to generate significantly more cost dollars, more sales, to the tune of $1,000 more, which is over a 50% lift off of that 1,700. So if we were trying to generate a 3-month promotion in this one particular account, you're talking, that's $3,000 more sales they could generate if they were to incorporate our solution. So if you have an account where you have been given promotions, you can compare your baseline to your promoted levels. If you don't have any history in that account, you'll have to find one that's kind of a like account. In this example here, if we knew this account was generating a 55, 60% lift, we could look at a different account that had never promoted us and say, okay, well, you averaged 1,000, a 60% lift is going to mean 1,600. That's going to be your gap. So you can apply some of that logic based on the lift to assume, hey, your lift will likely be similar than what accounts who have done it as a way of forecasting potential sales. And that's kind of the whole idea. If we had syndicated data, and again, I want to just expose people to some of the measures that would be available if you have, a good Nielsen or IRI workstation where you can generate a lot of these promotional measures. We can look at, again, it's similar to analysis we would do with assortment. We're comparing velocity to availability. So availability in this case, we're looking at what we call weighted weeks. So this particular measure is weighted weeks any display, but you could get weighted weeks feature and display. You could get weighted weeks feature. You could get weighted weeks TPR. You could get weighted weeks really under any of the promotional conditions that are available to you, because that tells us who got the real estate. In this case here, who got the floor space, right? So you can compare. So in this example here, when you compare the, let's just look at, as an example, if we just look at the Coors Light compared to Corona, Corona got 12 weeks of display support. Coors Light only got 5, but yet on a velocity basis, and this particular velocity measure is called dollars per million, which basically says for all of the volume that comes off displays, if we took this, you could say it's a fictitious $1 million, how much of that million will be contributed by different SKUs? Well, the numbers are pretty modest, but you can see if the Coors Light would generate $18 of that million compared to Corona at only 8, it means that the Corona displays are going to sell over two times slower than the Coors Light. And again, from a solution standpoint, if we were to say, hey, we can make your displays 2 times, 3 times, even 4 times more productive, you're talking about a significant difference in sales, making your solution pretty compelling. Again, a lot more information on this in last month's webinar. But any questions about this chapter? Jim, this is the one we spend the most time on, because to me, this is where, again, the rubber kind of hits the road.
Yeah, I mean, again, Tom, I just go back to the comment I made before, and not just sound like a broken record, but the ability Kevin mentioned earlier, I think you did, about how important this is when you ask Kevin about whether or not this is something that's being done, at all the accounts. And he alluded to, we're doing it with the more important ones. But this is really no different than any fundamental tactic or approach to anything. If a team is preparing for a championship game, they're going to go through the same kind of planning as they would, they're going to go through a set of plans and game plan for that. Why wouldn't that same team, if they were playing the team that is the last place in the league, take the same exact approach. And while the opportunity, the payoff may not be as great, if you add up the numbers of accounts that, maybe fall below that line, I'll use the BUD approach that Anheuser-Busch used to.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
there's a big opportunity there within the market in the smaller chains that if this approach were taken, it could elevate the performance of any supplier.
yeah.
And if you look at the craft suppliers who are really battling for that space, and they're battling oftentimes against the behemoths. If you
Yeah.
can walk in with this professional approach, it's going to separate you from
Yeah.
everybody else.
So Jim, you were talking about championship games. Of course, you're forecasting the University of Michigan at some point very soon being in a championship game. I assume that's what you're referring to. I
No,
assume.
that is not, Tom, what I'm,
No?
again, I have loved to, under promise and over deliver.
Oh,
I will say this, just diverse, Penn State, Michigan State, Ohio State. If they lost all three of those games, it would still be 9-3. I don't think they're going to lose all three of those games.
God, I hope not. We could talk about college football and the University of Michigan all day long, but business must intrude.
I agree.
All right.
So
All right.
just, Tom,
ahead.
just back to that chart very quickly.
Yeah.
Apologies. The last seminar was the first I attended, and I mean, all the numbers are very clear. I understand it, but just finding each of these within IRI, I had some challenges. Is there any I don't know, resource on your website or previous training of pointing out exactly like this is how you get the weighted weekly dollar per million? I mean,
where are you getting your syndicated from now, Matthew?
the Armadillo?
You are, okay. Oh, yeah. So Armadillo, yeah. If you and I want to spend some time offline, it would take me 5 minutes to walk you through on the Armadillo platform. They're going to have, well, they may not have dollars per million, Matthew, but they're going to have weighted weeks. I think you have to go to one of those promotional tabs or merchandise. I think it's merch. But you can absolutely conduct this analysis by weighted week. And then the other measure you're going to get is like merchandising velocity. I think it's sum of merch dollars, which I think is the weight. And we've had a lot of conversations with FinTech and Armadillo over the years on helping them build that out. So you absolutely will have it. I mean, I would say maybe what we can do, send us an email and we can schedule some quick time, and anybody else from your team who would want to be on that, I'm happy to walk you through that, because if you have Armadillo, you can absolutely conduct this analysis.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Good. I'm glad.
Hey, Tom, that's a great webinar topic that we could add. And looking at 22, adding just syndicated data interpretation, and that's all.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. All right. So when we think about presentation development, again, just important to point out kind of the different steps that we care about here. Again, it all starts with the opportunity identification and all of the analysis that we would do around identifying opportunities, creating our solutions, and then how do you put that together into a presentation? So obviously a title page, there's a few of these sections that I really am passionate about. If you ever had a retailer that said, we only allow 5 slides, we only allow whatever, I don't know how many do that. I know some some retailers tell you exactly what templates to fill out, because they're just so frustrated with the lack of compelling analysis that a lot of suppliers have done before you, that now you're having to deal with that distrust that has nothing to do with you. It has a lot to do with just the supplier community underwhelming these retailers. So a title page, not any big shakes, but the number 3, the objective slide around what's in it for the retailer, is absolutely critical. Agenda is a courtesy. So some people I've seen on the title page, they had the objective and the agenda. That was all one page. I mean, there's no rules. So if you felt like you had to do that, to keep your presentation to a minimum number of slides, I don't really worry about the number of slides, because quite frankly, If you build those slides properly, you're looking at a pretty easy ability to present those pretty quick. I'll kind of get into that. But after the agenda, now we get into the data. So we want to look at the category or the situation for the category. That's the situation analysis. That goes back to looking at total category, segment, package, style, identifying performance and development gaps. That's where that comes in. So situation analysis might be 2 slides. It might be 1 slide. It might be maybe as many as 3 slides, but I don't see it ever being more than that. I just don't. So that, and then the solution is going to be your promotional solution or your assortment solution, and you'll have absolutely no issue including that because that kind of ties it together. The action benefit is going to, be kind of a recap. So this is what I asked for. This is why it's a good idea, and so on. So that's what it looks like. I'll give you a quick example. Some of you may have seen it again, but I think going through this and reviewing it, maybe some things start to click. But when we start talking about slide construction, obviously we want to be constructing slides that are easy to understand. Jim, I always have heard that if you can't decipher the key takeaways of a slide within 5 seconds, it's probably not a well-constructed slide. So we can't have eye charts, right? Can't have eye charts. So again, our thought is we want absolutely the construction of the slide to include, let me go ahead and include that, the titles that are constructed by answering 3 questions. What are we looking at from an account standpoint? What are we looking at from a product standpoint? What are we looking at from a measurement or fact standpoint? And if we can answer those 3 questions in a relatively small amount of words, we don't want to have a paragraph for our title, but I'm not worried about if it goes to 2 lines. And I don't want anyone reading the data in a slide. I don't have a problem if you read the title, because the title is going to specifically indicate what you're looking at. And if we want to have any passion or confidence around what we're presenting, we have to have extraordinary command of what we're looking at, and the title gets us off to a great start. So when we think about slide construction, I would want you spending almost more time on the title than anything else, because the data is going to say what the data is going to say. The takeaway, while extremely important, is probably pretty obvious. And so we'll get into that. And so the title, what the slide says, the takeaway, what the slide means. This is kind of our editorial where we're really starting to tell the story of how our analysis is going to provide extreme value for the customer. And again, I can't, and I'll go through some examples of how we are encouraging our clients to build slides using the title and takeaway approach. So I'll get into that example when I walk through. So again, a title slide, the only do's and don'ts I would say, we want to make sure the logo is the most current logo. We want to make sure the name is spelled right. I would want you to put your name on the title page, probably a lower size font than what the buyer would have. I want the date on there too. We want to be able to catalog these things. And again, assuming that your buyer doesn't just trash all of the presentations, some of them do. We can't necessarily control that till they start to realize our presentations have meat. They are valuable. Now, when you get into the first and a really important chapter here, it does come down to what is the value of this presentation. We want to be able to, the first thing we want that customer to feel is that this call is about them. As much as it is about us, it's about them. We get that accomplished by coming out of the gate with an objective statement. Hey, we have, and again, your objective slide should have 2 components. What tactics are we trying to influence? So in this example, assortment. And then what benefit is going to happen? What goals are we trying to impact and influence? So in this example here, we have assortment solution that's going to increase sales for the category, but also improve their craft development. if we have had prior conversations around different KPIs of that customer, this is where, Kevin mentioned this at the beginning, it's chapter 1, and this is the beginning of the presentation. The whole idea is to start telling that story about how we can help their business. And if we understand from, like, let's say, you're starting to hit the time of the year where 2022 planning is going to start happening, couldn't encourage you any greater to start asking the questions, what's on the radar for 2022? What are your KPIs? What are your goals? Write that down into your CRM, Karma or LilyPad, whatever you use, and then reiterate that on the second page every time. And make sure that a lot of what your analysis concludes is how your solutions can align with whatever goals they have. I can assure you nothing will start building trust greater than having them realize that you're a resource for them, not just another person coming in trying to sell something. The agenda is, again, pretty straightforward. Ultimately, what are we going to be looking at? What are we going to include into this conversation? I don't think you need any more bullet points than what you see here. This is probably even too many. We could probably tighten this up even more. But once we get into and past the objective slide, we get past the agenda, we go right into the customer situation. So in this example here, if we were in the craft business, what we're looking at here, look at the title here. What we're looking at here is Matthews Grocery. We're looking at your grocery, Matthews Grocery, and we're looking at your category broken down by segment, looking at performance and development. That's what you're looking at. And when we look at it, and we've highlighted the craft row, this is not a PowerPoint class, but we can certainly want to isolate somehow where we live, what we're going to be talking about. The buyer could end up taking this conversation anywhere, but as we initially want to collaborate, I would say, hey, what you're looking at here is your category broken down by segment, looking at both performance and development. When we look at it, craft, the two questions I got to answer, craft is both outperforming and well-developed versus the market. Now, that's good news, but you have indicated to me in the past that 129 index for craft is not where you want it. You'd like to see it be higher, and you'd like to see it get to 135. So if that's what we have to present to collaborate with them and confirm that improving craft development is important to them, then we go, okay, so, recognizing how important growing craft further is for you, we looked at your craft business now, breaking down your craft business by style. Again, we can literally read the title. This is Matthews Grocery Craft Segment or Craft Style Performance and Development Analysis. When we look at your business, your craft business broken down by style, we quickly realize that it's the seasonal style that offers the biggest opportunities. Matter of fact, it's an $817,000 opportunity because you're both underperforming within seasonal and significantly underdeveloped. Matter of fact, it's the only segment that offers any significant opportunity for you to close. So if you want to improve craft, we've got to figure out a way to build your seasonal business. So we would collaborate on that. Then then guess what my solution is going to include? So now what you're looking at is an assortment solution of select seasonal SKUs that all have significant velocity that we can bring to the table, and they don't have great distribution. So the orange highlighted cells indicate what distribution increase we're going to suggest. And you're going to notice the corresponding distribution decrease suggestion will be on the next page. Ultimately, if they execute our solution, and notice here, there are 3 SKUs, assuming that I'm selling Fox and the other 2 are my competitors, it makes my solution much bigger. If I only sold the Fox in, that's really bringing, about half of what I'm going to be solving. I'd rather solve, for basically 64% of this gap than maybe what would be a third of that gap. So my solution is more compelling when I included more than just mine. This is an example of being objective. It's not only a solution, but it's an objective solution. So then we would again collaborate, and I would recap this. We'll get into this more next month, but hey, if you execute this solution, it's going to do what we said on the second slide. We're going to help increase your sales. but certainly help increase your craft development as well. The two things you mentioned you wanted to see get accomplished. So in addition to some of the numbers, we would then, this is where we'd get into some of the marketing, pricing, sell sheets, whatever we have to indicate the support of those brands. This is where this would go here. We'd want the beginning of the presentation to really highlight what's in it for the account. Now we can get into some of the support that we're going to provide, which is obviously still important, but now we've got their attention. Hey, those brands might make sense for me. But now we speak to some of the marketing and some of the support around how those velocities we've promised are going to happen because of that support. Then there'd be a recap. So, we would want to then, okay, so what we asked for, the requested action, and then the benefit. Again, this is kind of, it might seem pretty redundant, but recognizing you might have 4 or 5 slides of marketing support. Now, as you kind of wrap up your presentation, you're looking here, at a just a recap. Nothing on the action benefit slide should ever be new news. It should have already been covered. So what do people think? Let me ask for any feedback. This is how we want presentations constructed. I'd love to get some feedback about any of these particular sections that maybe you haven't necessarily executed and you're excited about it, or if you have, has it been successful? What are your feedback? Any overall takeaways about today's program?
I guess just one thing as it relates to
Chris, you were muted, Chris. We'll come back to you in a sec. Go ahead, Matthew.
Just with the last slide where you were highlighting some other packages from other suppliers that, might make sense. I guess I realize, this is probably knowing your retailer, but I mean, I guess the question is, how in instances of cherry picking the ones that you want to pick versus, the ones that I guess ultimately, what's driving this is, the ones that are driving the greatest CWD dollars. I guess how would one go about picking, those other 2 packages, for example? And, how do you rebut if, there's a package that has, 2% distribution, but it's doing, $50,000 per point, that's probably higher than yours. I guess, how do you balance those?
Well, okay, great question. So if we were doing some analysis, and again, this would be on the one, well, actually, we should have talked about this last month, Matthew, to a certain extent, but if you had 2% distribution for any SKU, including yours or your competition, I think you're making the point that, hey, that's not much of a track record. That velocity rate is enormous. If we were to expand distribution on that SKU, would it maintain that same sales velocity? The answer is probably it wouldn't. So I probably wouldn't include any of those. I'd want to see at least 20, 30% CWD or ACV on any SKU that I would suggest, just because I'd want to make sure that there's some track record. If it only had 2%, I probably wouldn't. So that would be one thing. The other thing I would say would be, again, I'm probably not going to select any SKUs that would be from some of the biggest suppliers. Those suppliers certainly are going to be making the case for their own brands, and they don't need me to do it. But if there are brands within our competitive set that, maybe they're struggling getting any frequency of visibility with the customer, and here's the thing too, if we did pick an item that had actually greater velocity, and I guess this could happen, and I think it's a good kind of watch out. You would hate it if the buyer said, hey, like in this example here, Fox has the greatest velocity, but let's say that Great Lakes had a greater velocity than we did, just as an example. We would be like crushed if they said, hey, I'm not going to take yours, but thanks for pointing out the Great Lakes, because that's a great idea. I hadn't seen that one. I'm bringing it in. I'm probably willing to take that risk, but I probably would try to select items that are going to be, I probably wouldn't be too worried if they were greater than ours. Yeah, so I'm probably talking out of both sides of my mouth here a little bit, Matthew, but I think the fact is you want your overall solution to be as big as it possibly can be. But I think when it comes time to supporting your brands, you know, in this example here, this would be a no-brainer. But I think your point is when it isn't as much of a no-brainer, what do you do? I still think you're obligated to really put yourself in the best position to help that account, and then just support your suggestion with all the marketing and other aspects that you have to say, hey, you know, our brand is going to be worthy to be on the shelf. And the way I always position it when I sell in any of these solutions would say, hey, you're probably going to hear from Great Lakes. You're probably going to hear from North Peak. When you do, they have a good story to tell, enough about their brands, you know, but you're going to hear from a million suppliers. Some of them may not have a very good story. These folks, it appears as if they do have a pretty good story. It's kind of how I would do that. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Christopher, I think you were muted. We were hearing some incredible insight, but then we weren't able to hear you.
Yes, of course. This just a surface level analysis on my end. I just really do appreciate you guys sending this over. Just taking on a new role. This is extremely helpful for me because we always send presentations, but I'm always kind of off to the side since I've taken a different role from when I started with the company.
Congrats.
Thank you. But with the upcoming challenges of having to hold meetings with some of my suppliers, it's nice to actually have kind of a format, like a formal format that I could follow too. I know our company sets one out, but it really does kind of put into perspective the different styles I can take with it too. So it's just really a good, useful tool that you guys are putting out there.
Excellent. Thank you. Yep. Other thoughts, other feedback?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to expand on Matthew's question too, because I think the most important thing is like the numbers don't lie, and they're gonna find those opportunities anyway. So I think you're already giving yourself a setup. You're like, yep, I acknowledge this one's great, but ours is also very good too. So it's here's why we have option 1 and 2 to go after this, because that's going to be the catch. They may otherwise, if you don't call that out, they may be like, yep, this one's a good one to cut, and we know we'll put this Great Lakes one in because this one was ranked higher. So if you have a couple options already laid out, I think that helps add your credibility for sure for it. And I think your part on that CWD or ACV, like that 20 to 30, if it's below that, it's really tough to call out and see. But if you've got something that's already at 50% distribution, like those we're showing, they're gonna identify that too. So you're just already this is a thing that Anne Marie hates that I share with her, but she's very good at telling her buyers how smart and strong and how funny they are. This is just another version of that, because this is we know you're going to see this. So I think that's a good idea. You guys should do this. But by the way, we have these things too that can also help out and do it. So I think it's very, very logical to keep that in your presentation and show it. It just adds credibility.
No, good point. And I would say that for the purposes of the training, you notice that on my assortment solution, I'm talking about 3 SKUs to add 3 SKUs to subtract, so to speak. You might have 8 and 8 or 10 and 10. It does. I mean, for purposes of our training, we didn't need to get into 10, but you're limited to, again, the amount of time you have to analyze and really just how big of a solution you're looking to. I mean, the bigger the solution, then maybe the more difficult it might be to ultimately get it executed, but the more SKUs, the more impact. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
And again, it's related to what Matt had said, and even Kevin, you addressed it a little bit in terms of pointing out the different marketing and support elements that you could bring to the table, even if the data doesn't necessarily support it. And I would think that would apply with either a new brand or new rollout of a brand that doesn't have any data to support it yet. Would you ever advise that you're presenting data? Maybe there is a market outside the market of the account where the performance of your brand is doing really well. And that might be the only evidence that you could use to support your recommendation and the solution against, let's say, 2% or 10% of the mix as it currently stands. Would you ever use that to help support
I think
it?
if our brand was expanding and it was a new brand in that market, I could easily see doing that. If we've been in that market for a while and then a market a way. I mean, I wouldn't say I wouldn't use it, but it would be a little bit more difficult to explain why is that market, trending way better than the market that we're in. But I think, again, I think you speak to just the need for as much creativity as we possibly can bring to the table. There's no rules. There could be some buyer that could be compelled by that. Hey, if that market's generating that, then let's give it a shot. I would want to generate that kind of growth too. I could see where that could work. Absolutely.
Well,
could
and
work.
we've even used that as a reference in the past with regards to independent accounts, because if you don't have any type of syndicated data to support why you're recommending something for an independent account, you can use syndicated data that is pointing to a chain or somewhere that's really supporting your recommendation based on what the market is doing. So I just look at it the same way, but I agree with you with regards to adjacent market, or unless it's a new brand or company, which I think that ABC would have a great opportunity to use that.
Agree. Good stuff. Any other thoughts or questions? Be proud of your presentations. Understand the story that you're building. Next month, we'll get into more on how we present that story. So I think that is again, I think today's topic, there's a lot of need. I think next month's topic, there's a extreme amount of need. So if you can make that one live, great. We'll look forward to seeing all of you then. But thanks for jumping in today. Thanks for your contribution. And again, Matthew, please reach out. Let's get that scheduled. We can get you in the promotion and analysis business right away.
Awesome. Thank you very much for all this.
All right, and good stuff. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, and continued good selling. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.